Welcome to the Open Source Founder Podcast. Joining us today is Daniel, co-creator of Tauri and founder of CrabNebula. For those of you that don't know, Tauri helps you build cross-platform desktop applications and mobile applications. Recently, a few days ago, you released 2.0, Tauri 2.0 beta, and you will give us a demo, an exclusive one. So thank you very much. We're super excited. And after the demo, we can discuss also about Tauri and CrabNebula. Thanks for joining, Daniel.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Should I just start the screen share?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So what we see here on the bottom left is a classical desktop app in Tauri's dev mode, which is basically kind of a preview of what you're going to have when you finally bundle the app. It's really useful when you're developing to get instant feedback. And the beta has now stabilized Tauri's 2.0 branch to the point where it's generally useful. And one of the things you can do with Tauri that you couldn't do before is mobile apps. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an emulator. This is an Android emulator, but iOS emulator is also available. It's just, too much going on to do all of them at the same time. But this is kind of the neat thing. If you're familiar with web dev, you've got something called hot module reloading, which means as you make a change in the developer environment, here at the top, I'm using VS Code. As you make a change there and save the file, so welcome to today's demo, and I save it, what we get is an instant update of both the desktop app's preview version and the mobile app's preview version. And when I first saw this, I was pretty impressed. Sure, you have an app that has Rust in the back end, so I can send a message to that app on the desktop version. So I'll just say my name is Daniel. That's the anglicized version of my name, and I'll click greet. And this message was sent to the Rust core that's behind all the Tauri apps, and then replied back across our message boundary with the IPC protocol. And if you notice, that didn't change the state of the mobile app. And that's quite compelling for me, because I can go to the mobile app and say, I'll just give myself my Germanized name, and I'll greet. And the state is respectively the same. Well, I mean, it's respective to each instance that's running, right? We've got two different instances. And again, I can change the UI code with, let's just say, you know what, I'm gonna get rid of the logos just because, everybody knows what Tauri is, and if you don't know what Solid is, you've been living under a rock. And I'm gonna save that again, and boop, they're gone. And everybody's probably saying, yeah, Daniel, we know this stuff. But what you might not recognize on a wide format screen is something that the mobile user is going to see. So if we go to our button that says greet, and we just change it to something like stay hello and save that, suddenly my layout changes in mobile. It doesn't really change in desktop, right? And what I find so interesting about this new opportunity for multi-platform, multi-device design is, as a developer, you can, work with the wireframes of your designer and all that stuff. But once you get into things, you're like, well, shoot, we can't say hello because it just looks like junk on mobile. Why do you have those come on, I can't make it smaller because no one's going to be able to read it, right? And so it's a great way to get really quick feedback in the development process. And I would just like to say thank you to the demo gods for not crashing my system. So I'm going to just stop there and say thank you. And, back when we were proposing the idea to the working group, the Tauri Working Group, of introducing mobile, there were some voices that said it's a bad idea. Don't do it. If you're out there listening to this, you know who you are, and I still love you. But what we discovered along the way, part of the joy of writing anything, whether it's a novel or code, is the discoveries you make. And one of the discoveries that we made early is that the API design that we created works great on desktop, just like that button works great on desktop. Say hello. On mobile, it's different. And the API needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. We wouldn't have known. It would have solidified. And I think that the revisions that were made to the way people interact with the core of Tauri is for me the most exciting part of it, because it's like we're still involved in creating something valuable and we're learning through the process, right? And I think that's something that continuously encourages me to stay involved in the project and brings people in. I think that everybody who comes into the working group brings in their own ideas, and the doers end up deciding, which I think is great.
That's the right approach. And I mean, what I just saw, this is a superpower and very unique. I don't know anything else that I can do like this exact same thing and ship so fast. So now with the beta, like a lot of things are in place. People can just take a stab at it. And there's a review for the stability of the release, but it's good to go, right?
For us, beta, well, alpha, beta, and RC have specific meanings, right? The alpha phase was quite long. We had premises that we had to prove or disprove, and ideas that needed implementation. There's a number of security features that, security is at our core. It's one of our, philosophical groundstones. It's a really important thing. And anything that touches security has to be well thought and implemented. And alpha is that time for innovation. And, sometimes you just throw your idea out and start with something else. It just takes time. And beta is the point, the beta that we marked last weekend. For everybody else, that's the beginning of February. Was, okay, we're happy with this design. It works for us. Now we have external auditors. The company known as Radically Open Security is auditing the Tauri 2.0. They audited the Tauri 1.0. They've been doing it for a while. Tauri's mega complex. There's a ton of libraries involved, and they've been working on the low-level libraries while we finish the high-level Tauri universe. And now they're able to investigate what we built for Tauri itself. And by the way, to date, they've found no major vulnerabilities in any of the code that we've written. It's not because we're friends. It's because we had a great foundation to build on and an amazing group of people that have been involved. And there was a comment today on Twitter, great news that this has been released, but it's been a disappointing dev experience as the docs have not been updated and there's very little information in the blog about what upgrades are required to make the switch from alpha to beta. Any thoughts? And I guess the comment that I have is primarily writing documentation on top of a moving target like Tauri's alpha is a fool's errand. We've built tooling to help you migrate. Tauri migrate is a command you can run to migrate from 1.0 to 2.0. Of course, there's rough edges because everybody writes code differently, but it will get the configuration right. And now is the time for us to really focus on the documentation. And once the documentation is complete and the auditors have come back and we fixed all of the things that they found, small or big, then we mark it as a release candidate. A release candidate means feature complete, fit for purpose. Perhaps there's something that in all of these wild edge cases was missed. And it's a time for the community to say, yeah, all right, the RC is something that we can get behind, but it's still not stable. And stable comes a short time after RC. That's where we're at right now. We're happy with the design. And of course, there's still things to iron out on the way to a stable release.
Thank you for sharing this timeline. And well, this approach makes perfect sense. And, writing and updating the docs will be a community activity as well. So now taking, a step back, we would love to hear about your personal background all the way to co-creating Tauri, if you'd like to.
Wow. I mean, I moved to Germany in the year 2000 to study fine arts. I'd already received a Bachelor of Fine Arts, but at the university, my work moved into media. And my thesis project was a complicated object that was a real-time analog real-time analog holographic projection system with homemade video projectors. This was back in 2004. And the holograph was important, or hologram, or the idea of one, because I was presenting the notion that a digital identity is a part of a human identity, and that digital identity was qualified enough to defend the artist behind the artwork, as it were. Needless to say, after that project, I sort of received the recognition in the communities I was active in as, like that uncle who can bridge these genres of media, technology, culture, community. And that's pretty much what I've been doing my entire career. A lot of the time I spent in volunteerism. It's hard to know how many hours. I think it's something like about 20,000 hours of volunteer time in my lifetime. And a lot of that has been in collaborative culture. And I think that writing code is collaborative culture. I think that open source is a license, but the community is a group of people who have aligned goals, more or less, and work together. For me, it's the community that's inciting. We call it like open source software. I think of it more in the context of a digital commons that a community works on together. And the licensing, that's all stuff that you have to do. And community is something that you choose to do. And I think that desire to be part of a community is at the root of why we do software the way we do. If I didn't have friends in this Tauri community, I couldn't have built it. Like, if it was just Lucas sitting in a cafe in Brazil alone, he couldn't have done it. Like, actually, without all of the people who've contributed to Rust, we couldn't have done it. The whole notion of what a web view is was built by geniuses, giants, like HTML. I mean, you can argue that JavaScript was a mistake, but it's still what we have. And I feel like the conversation that we're having in these communities is a progression built on what came before. Like a car was built on the notion of a cart, and an airplane was no, maybe an airplane comes from UFOs. I don't know,
But the community is where the strength and how this project has manifested, that's where it all comes from. But that's also where a lot of the challenges come from in terms of the collective decision making, the governance, the sustainability. And so, how have you approached all this so far, and what can we learn from it?
One of the reasons why I think we sort of exploded in popularity had to do with the point in time where we were doing this. Back in 2019, there was amazingly crazy divisiveness in the JavaScript community. Like, you were either on the React team, the Vue team, or the Angular team, or maybe one of the other ones that were out there back then. And what I feel we've been able to accomplish in the Tauri community is bringing those or bridging that divide, bringing people together that wouldn't classically have anything to talk
Mm.
about except at a W3C meeting about SVG standards or something. Like, yeah, everybody has these same problems of how do I use the API, or I want to use this configuration, and we don't care where you're from. Like, we don't care which stack you're using. We want to support everybody. And inside of the organization, we've attempted to do something similar. From the beginning, we've worked hard to stay accountable and transparent and accessible. And, the way that we've made or worked toward our accessibility is through our working group. So way back when it was just a couple of us, if it's 3 people in a video call, what do you need a working group for? Right? It's like, good idea, bad idea. Yeah, I'm going to do this. You're going to do that. All right, cool. Let's go. But as more and more people get involved and the project becomes more and more complicated and there's special activities involved, you start to notice that people group together in little huddles. And as more and more people joined, what do you do with a core team of 10 people, 11 people, 12 people? It stops making sense, right? So we developed an open working group model. Basically, the way it works is you show up somewhere in the community, whether that's GitHub or Twitter or Discord, probably Discord, and you start contributing to the community's knowledge base, or fixing a bug, or filing a feature request, making the PR, getting yourself involved in the community. And generally speaking, people get recognized for that by the existing team and then recruited for the working group. It's like, hey, do you want to get closer to the team, meet the team, and work with the team? And if people accept and the team doesn't have any vetoes, then they're brought into the working group and they get access to the private Discord channels for the team, and they get access to the GitHub repos, and they can branch away and make PRs and file issues, respond to other people's issues. And all of that's possible because of a principle that I like to call interrelatedness. And it's an old technique from grassroots organization where you're faced with a dilemma. You work with volunteers and you don't have any guarantee that they're going to stick around. They take on a task, but you don't know if they're going to finish it. And through interrelatedness, what you achieve as an organization is a type of interdependence on the other, where a type of social pressure is exerted from within the individual to unblock the others, right? And it's a really simple technique. It's called a pull request review. Like, I can't merge. I could abuse my authority and merge, but I can't maintain my standing in the community and merge my own pull requests. And neither can anyone else, not even Lucas. We have this hard requirement of getting code review. And what that means is you're putting your team in the position of looking at what you've done. And that interrelatedness as a core principle is what I believe to be the secret key to success for open source. As soon as you get into the benevolent dictator for life model, it's over. At some point, either the dictator recognizes that they're being a dictator and decides to bow into the peer pressure of letting other people decide, or they don't. And when they don't, that's when projects just start to disappear and lose relevance.
Well, it's super insightful, and that interdependence is what also like creates a lot of accountability for people, and comes with autonomy as well. So that's a, I want to say, unique, powerful, and successful model for you guys, for Tauri. And shifting gears, it looked like you saw that there was some additional space to support the ongoing development of Tauri, put resources behind it and engineering bandwidth, as well as help organizations who are using Tauri to be successful through consulting services. And so CrabNebula was created. Tell us about this story so far.
I mean, I have to backtrack a little bit because CrabNebula didn't just arise. It wasn't just like one day we're like, we're going to monetize. Let's get rich. Actually, it was the contrary. One day we got contacted by a venture capitalist and we were like, we're not prepared for that, right? Like, as an open source group of friends, what happens if someone goes rogue and sells the idea? And how can we prevent that from happening? How can we prevent financial bust factor?
Sure.
So what we did is we became a program. The Tauri program within the Commons Conservancy is the official name of the project. And it is a statute-bound organization within a Dutch nonprofit that owns or holds the moral stewardship over the project. There's an elected board of directors, of which there's 7, and the working group is the entity entitled to qualify or disqualify people from participating as representatives of them in the board. And it brought another layer of organization governance to the project that took a while to get right. I think at the beginning, we maybe tried to do too much like organizational stuff with it, but ultimately the board is really there to fight for the trademark and to decide on how to spend the donations and to agree to partnerships and that kind of thing, for which you need a legal entity or legal person.
And decentralization activities. Yeah, absolutely. And just to quickly note here to people that this may sound like confusing or arcane or why are all these things needed, like the scale of Tauri, it's the 3rd largest Rust project on GitHub, right? Like it's 75,000 stars right now. So these go hand in hand, I feel like, the scale of the community, the usage with the requirement to have this kind of group behind it, or that's how you approached it, right?
Sure, but I mean, I think the flip side is, let's just pretend that someone, myself or Lucas, decided as the co-creators of Tauri to sell Tauri for $50 million to some rich company, exit, with the FU money, and then that company could use its lawyers to change the licenses, and the community that was grown to build this project would be cut out. And we didn't want that. And that was the guiding light for why we went community first. Nevertheless, as time moves forward, we've been doing this for almost 5 years now. As time moves forward, people burn out. And people have burned out. And at a certain point, we were facing not exactly exodus, but potentially losing critical contributors to Tauri. And, we thought about it, spent about, a couple months thinking about it, talking to people. And we ultimately created a company that served the purpose of fulfilling the needs of the community that the community was not in a position to do. So I'll give you an example. A community based on volunteers cannot accept a contract for work based on leveraging the goodwill of volunteers. It might not be illegal, but it's immoral, and you have no guarantees that the other party is going to do it. So first of all, we got questions all the time. Can you help us? Can you do this for us? And what ended up happening in a number of cases is people from the working group would take on a one-off contract, which is okay, but it's definitely not sustainable. especially because the work that needs to be done isn't on helping someone implement Tauri. Sure, there's value in that, but it's more about the 1 million lines of code in core. It's about figuring out how web views work on every platform and building a middleware that is unified across them, more or less, and solves the edge cases of which the Linux ecosystem has shattered into. Like, that's the important stuff. But there's other issues. Like, we love GitHub. GitHub is a for-profit company, and it provides services for open source projects, which is great. But if you're running a proprietary project and you want to use GitHub releases, now do you have to make your proprietary project public if you want to use GitHub releases? How do you get metrics about those releases? How do you know that it's actually available? All right. And to that end, we've spent a lot of time conceiving of and building a cloud for distribution of these artifacts, not replicating GitHub. We're not doing CI. We expect you to do that yourself. But we now, as CrabNebula, provide a service that you can use to distribute your Linux, Windows, Mac, binaries to everybody. Tauri is not stable 2.0 yet, so we're not servicing mobile yet. That's going to come, of course. And, we've recognized that there's also not enough time to do R&D. Like, if you imagine the caliber of engineering that this group of people have in them, and then you hit them Monday morning with 35 new issues over the weekend, and you go to the Discord and there's 120 problems that people are having, and you're constantly playing catch up. These, like, thoroughbreds, they don't have time to spend a couple weeks on thinking about something else. And when you have the stability of a job that says, yeah, you can work on open source, you can have new ideas. If you want to take a couple weeks, that's great. We want you to do that. I think there's one other compelling story, though, similar to this say hello button from the beginning demo. When we started the company, we went to a lot of trade fairs in Europe, in the US, and at one of them, I remember this so clearly. In the afternoon, after I'd talked at Rust Nation in London, someone rushed the table, and he's like, guys, you got to help me. I'm building a Diaxis app, and I don't know how to run the Tauri updater with it, because it's too tightly coupled to Tauri core. And it took us a while to figure out how we wanted to, make things better. But it also raised a really, really, really important lesson, I think, for me, for the rest of the team, and for open source in general. And that is similar to the journey that an author has when writing a book. You discover things along the way that you never anticipated. We did not expect to solve a major ecosystem, and by ecosystem, I mean everybody who's building apps. We did not expect to solve that problem with Tauri. We were just trying to, make a more efficient harness for desktop apps. As it turns out, we've developed a service that would grow into a project we call Packager at CrabNebula that allows you to, at the moment, bundle up an Electron app and make updates for it. You can do the same thing for Diaxis, which, by the way, leverages some of the same ecosystem that Tauri is built on. Slint works. And, as more and more people visit the project, we will discover new applications for this. And I think the big lesson there is to stop thinking so narrowly about you solving your own problems and try to find ways to solve them for the greater ecosystem. And I'm not trying to do the Obama meme of giving myself a medal right now. I think that it's really critical to jump over your own shadow, and to say, hey, it's okay that you're building an Electron app. We don't hate you. In fact, we care for you so much that we're going to give you a system that you can use right now with NPM that's going to make your life easier and better. Does Cargo Packager slot perfectly into your CI that you're going to use to build apps and distribute them with CrabNebula Cloud? Oh yeah, it's a side effect because we care about you. We want you to make sure that you're getting the best out of your time. And is it open source? Absolutely. MIT Apache 2. You can take it, make it better. Hopefully you contribute it back. But yeah, I think it's the right thing to do at the right time, and I'm glad we did it.
And where could this be, if you let yourself potentially naively think about where this could be in some years, along with everything else happening in the ecosystem or the other options developers have to bundle, design, to distribute, to update their apps cross-platform on all devices and systems. How do you picture this?
Well, I think a lot of things. And I can imagine a lot of ways that things could turn out. I mean, don't quote me on this, but when you start building your own web view, we're collaborating with people who are working on Servo. And we did an experiment where we built a Servo-based web view for Rye. I mean, at the point where, as a group, we're starting to take ownership within the larger Rust ecosystem for the user interface, for the display, for the keyboard, for the storage. Would you consider that at some point an operating system? I might, but more importantly, two things. When we launched Tauri 1.0 stable, it was the same week that Internet Explorer 11 and Atom Shell were deprecated. Or their deprecation was announced. You don't just deprecate for one day, but they were announced in that week. And for me, that's a huge reminder that as soon as your technology stops listening to consumers, stops being relevant to developers, you're going to be deprecated as a project. And are we going to dive headfirst into Apple Vision? Thought about it. Why not? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just another screen with just another haptic interface. Is there something stopping us from doing it? Maybe the expense of the hardware, but at certain scales, it doesn't matter anymore. Are we going to start jumping into building Xbox games? Well, technically, Xbox does provide a WebView 2 interface. Is it being explored by R&D at CrabNebula? Yes.
Not.
But I think there's a more important question. And that has to do with the Rust language itself. And it's something it took me a long time to learn. What a lot of beginners in Rust struggle with is the compiler. The compiler is the thing that takes your Rust code and turns it into something useful. And when you build broken code, well, it breaks down and it tells you kind of what happened, and you don't understand what error codes are until you figure out there's multiple different ways to represent strings and integers and all of that stuff. But what Tauri does out of the gate, when you have all of the system dependencies installed, is it gives you something that works. And by works, I mean it bundles. You can package it up. You can run it on your computer. What that implies for the development process is understanding what done means. Having a notion of being done. I mean, I remember the projects that I would work on based in the Node.js ecosystem, and never felt like I would get done. Like, I might catch most of the errors, but then you have to install some service like Sentry to make sure that you didn't miss some. And that's why you use try catch. And then and finally, and you never know what's going on. You just kind of have to assume And I think the mental model of being done transferred over to the idea of a framework like Tauri. Well, what we've tried to do with the 2.0 is reintroduce a base set of modularity such that as new use cases, platforms, systems arise, that we can create adaptations that still work in that baseline system. So in some contexts, when 2.0 stable lands, and don't hate on me, working group, for saying this, from some perspectives, we're done. From other perspectives, we're absolutely not. We know that the moment 2.0.0 lands, there's going to be a 2.0.1 because CI is hard and Tauri is complex. But 3.0, there are rumors of a 3.0 being thought about. But a 4.0? I don't know. And what that suggests to me is that, like some kinds of software, you can actually approach being done. And what being done means is that you, as an engineer, as a developer, have a chance to think about what's next. You get to innovate again instead of dealing with issues that are things like, I filed this issue 3 months ago and no one responded and I'm really angry about it, right? Instead of like dealing with that kind of maintenance nightmare, you get to innovate again. And that's what I'm wishing for the working group, and I'm going to work hard to get us to a point where we can really be done and start all over again.
This is very compelling. And so we're wishing you the best along this way, and we'll be following all the progress. While you were speaking about sort of like how things could form in the future, what popped into my mind was something you mentioned some months ago when also CrabNebula was announced to the world about a browser. Now, adding this extra layer of complexity, what could we say here? Because it's related to the previous one.
There's some calculations that would suggest that the creation of the Chrome browser cost $1 billion. If you look at the complexity of things like the Web Transition API, or the simplicity of the box model inside of floating CSS, or complying with modern ECMAScript, it's a huge task. Not to mention everything surrounding accessibility and the requirements of various nations and supranations like Europe for protecting human identity. Do I think that there's space for something like that? Yeah, absolutely. Is it something we're going to solve with 50 volunteers and 5 full-time engineers? No. Are there efforts underway? I've heard of a couple, and there's a lot of projects who are trying to reinvestigate what the web is all about. And I'm pretty sure that some friends are going to be involved in that conversation. And I'm not trying to say no, and I'm not trying to say yes. I think that, as with any massive project with enormous human involvement, it's important to take baby steps. Mm-hmm. I think growing a community to the scope that Tauri has after 5 years took 5 years. Like, you can't open up a company tomorrow and have 5,000 employees. It's just not possible. Even if you have 20 lawyers and 15 HR reps, it takes years to grow a team, whether open source or corporate. It has to be humanly possible to do anything. And I think that Tauri is a step in that right direction. I think Servo is a step in that right direction. And I think that stepping together through toward a future where we get to decide what the internet looks like is an exciting challenge. Are we there yet? No. Can we get there? I think it's something that humanity has proven over and over again. You can get anywhere you imagine.
And open source is, a tool and a community of choice to help you get there. What's the saying that sort of you want to go fast, go alone, want to go far, go with others. And so my question is, with open source is in the spotlight, so is commercial open source. To people who are new to software, to startups, to open source, and for those who are considering, starting a company, starting their own projects, what could we tell them in terms of these new realities, and maybe any piece of advice or something to keep in mind going forward?
Get your licenses straight from the beginning. Don't rug pull your licenses. Don't create a new license unless you work very closely with, no, never mind. It's like creating your own cryptography. You don't do it. Get it right from the beginning, draw a line in the sand, get inspired about what these different open source licenses mean, and stick to it. No one is forcing anybody who uses Tauri to use an open source license. I know a lot of people, friends of mine, who are building proprietary software on top of Tauri, and that's totally legitimate. But take a stance. Take a stance to it. And I think there's a risk in leveraging an open source community that companies can fall into really quickly when they think they own the community. And I guess the other piece of advice is protect your community, care for your community, because if you're building an open source software company, the community is your biggest resource, and screwing them over will lead to, a HashiCorp exodus where all of your competitors are gleefully, rubbing their hands. We're just going to make the same thing, except cut you out of it, right? It's like the IBMification of Red Hat, where suddenly, oh yeah, we're just going to make it impossible for you to build. And other people are like, no. Open source, and specifically the communities behind the digital commons, will hold you accountable. And it's really important to get that messaging right and to care deeply about them, because if you don't, it'll show. And I think the open source communities are important, and it's why I do what I do.
Very well said. Very well said. And to people who are getting started, who want to learn more about, who want to practice, first of all, software, who want to make a contribution, who want to get involved.
I think there's some basics you have to understand about modern software development. You have to understand what Git is. Unfortunately, it is the system that pretty much everybody uses on the planet for code collaboration. And if you're getting into open source, it is always all about collaboration. So that's number one. Number two, check your tone at the door. If you're rude to other people in the community and nobody knows you, it's a great way to get hammer banned or reported to GitHub or whatever. Just be a kind person and think of the other person that you're talking to, the other side of the issue or the pull request, the chat message. They're people too, and they care deeply about what they're doing. And a great place to get started, it's repeated a lot. I think a great place to get started is in the documentation. Read the documentation, because if you're going to be using the software, you should read the docs, because it's too complicated to just figure out. And sometimes the best documentation is the code. So maybe my secret message is read the documentation, because good code is self-documenting, but should have some documentation in it. And look for mistakes. Look for things you don't understand, because then you're practicing your skill of analysis. And that skill that you develop through the time of reading the code and understanding it will at some point surface a mistake, whether that's a spelling mistake or somebody copy pasted the wrong thing. Then learn how to clone the repository. Well, you probably have to fork it first and then clone the fork and then You see what I'm saying? Git is complicated. You fork it, then you clone it, then you make your changes, you commit with a proper message, and then you push that commit to a branch on your fork, and then you pull request that. Like there's a lot of detail here in this complicated system. Once you've done it a couple times, it becomes second nature, and there's great tooling for it. And that's why a low friction way for beginners, absolute beginners, to do it is in documentation. And that, like, I always feel like heartwarmed when someone finds a mistake in stuff that we have live on GitHub or on the website. It's like, thank you. I appreciate it. And, as time goes on, find things that you think could be done better, or even more important, bugs, stuff that is broken, and create an issue and teach people how to replicate it, and maybe even figure out how to fix it, and then create a pull request that closes the issue that you just created. And that's the collaboration that open source software teams are looking for. And another entry point is Discord. I think like almost all open source projects have Discords. So like go to the Discord, ask questions, be wrong, have people tell you how to be right, and participate in that community that way. If you stick around for months, the organizers of that server are going to recognize it and, become friends, join the community, participate. And, I think everything else sort of falls from there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so get those table stakes in the beginning, and then expect that you will get feedback, you will get interaction, you will get guidance, you will get mentorship. Like, you will work with a team that builds complex software and puts it in production. And that's where else can someone get that, especially when they're starting up in the
Right.
That's absolutely the case. What do you usually tell founders and commercial open source founders if you get the chance to advise people, because you've been around for a little while now, you're going through this motion yourself, just trying to extract just some little more advice here, or a mistake to avoid?
Design a company. I think that there's a rush to get to product market fit and a rush to create a product. And if you missed creating a company, which means, filing your taxes, it means getting a financial audit. It means having honorable contracts with your employees. It's like the secret sauce of startup life is to be a company. And if you're so focused on just creating a product, you're going to run out of runway and you won't have built a company. And then, you're going to get trapped in the expensive capital market game of raising another round. And I think the other advice that I commonly give is figure out how much you think you need to raise for 3 years and double it. And that's how much you should be raising. Human time is expensive, and you want to keep the best people around you that you can. And running a shoddy business is a great way to lose people. I mean, what else?
Quickly add here, the part of creating a company is also figuring out the business activities. I mean, building products is one of them, but there's also distributing the product, and then having an outbound motion or catering to the inbound motion, and having customer success. And like, there's all these like peripheral activities that you need to have a plan for from early on, right? And how all of these ultimately drive revenue. Yeah.
Also, even if you're a CEO or a CTO, you're responsible for the code and you should get involved in the code. You should be building the product alongside the rest of the team, even if there's only 10 of you or 5. Like, even if it's not your daily job, being in touch with the team, understanding how the team dynamics work, understanding what your code does gives you confidence when you're talking about it. And really don't underestimate the amount of time that goes into human resources. Like HR, like don't wait on bringing in someone to work with you on HR. If you have a number of founders, make sure that one of them feels compelled to care for the team. It's
Although with open source, you have this direct pipeline, right? I mean, through the community, like you very oftentimes find people that then join full time. And so just adding that note there that should make your life.
It could, but I think one of the risks of only recruiting from open source is that people who work in open source do it for a variety of reasons. And there is a spectrum of social ability that people are on one side, the other, in the middle. And just because you're good at open source doesn't mean you're good at a startup. Startups change priorities quickly. They sometimes pivot. And if you're not able to pivot along with that because you have a very clear thought in your mind of what things should be like, maybe it isn't for you. And I can speak with confidence that not everyone who works in open source is going to be finding joy in a corporate environment, even if it's an open source software company.
Very interesting. Do you have any spicy takes these days to share with people? Anything?
Spicy takes. I think PHP is okay. I think Python 2 is not okay. If you're still running Python 2 and you know you are, my favorite language is Rust. And I can't think of anything else.
Last remarks, perhaps, or if you would like to maybe share your screen again and show the website, the repository, give a call to action to people.
Sure. Let me find the Tauri Tauri website. All right. 73.9 thousand stars. Screen. Here we go.
Crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the Tauri repo, and I mean, one of the docs that I love to share is this one, the Architecture MD, and what it does and why you should have it is that it explains from a high level how things are glued together. And I don't know, I'm particularly proud of this because it's leading by example, right? Like, it's one thing to introduce developers to Rust through Tauri. It's another thing to encourage young engineers in open source to do things in healthy ways. I mean, one of my favorite files in the repo, I think, is probably going to be the audit workflow right there. So we run a cron job to check to see if there are Rust or NPM vulnerabilities that we weren't aware of. I like it. Makes me feel good. It makes me feel like we've got a continuous something. If you did want to contribute and you made a change that's about to get merged, what you might notice is that we've got this weird thing called .changes. This is written by a Tauri core member and now member of the Tauri board, Jacob. He wrote a system called, we've got a pull request here from 4 days ago, and we've got a little Tauri patch bug, fixed regression on the JavaScript. And it looks simple. Like, it's just like, okay, you make a pull request and you change one thing. But there's so many implications here, right? You're responsible for documenting your change. We know which pull request it was. We have the commit hash. We know who did it. That's all stuff you can get out of blame. But when you go to the to the Tauri project's website. So you go to Tauri app, and whoa, that's weird. All right, you go here, and you look for the releases. What you get is features, enhancement, bug fixes, and changes, right? So out of this practice of documenting what you do, we get you can go back in time to, as we were building the system out back in 0.6, which was, I think, 2020, right before COVID hit. And, we've got a bunch of different applications, like a 404, for example. Or here, RAI, breaking change, update raw window handle crate to 0.6, drive in, RAI patch. Okay. Nice. What this teaches us about software engineering is to document your changes, to explain it to other people, and to make it available to the broader community. That's what transparency is about. That's what accessibility is about. And that's what cooperation is about.
Thank you for sharing these best practices. It's very well on point. And to people, maybe for a closer, who have not yet tried Tauri, let's give them a little nudge and a promise of what they will get.
You might have already tried Tauri and you didn't know it. You might have already tried Tauri and you didn't know it. I think there's a lot of people building apps out there right now. The hurdles of Rust is complicated. We help you with. That's what the community is there to do. And really, if you're interested in building on mobile, and you complain about the complexity of iOS and Android, then you haven't been building on mobile for the past decades. It's not easy. There's a lot of stuff, and we try to make it as pain-free as possible, and I think you should try it out. I think you should file issues, close issues. Actually, close other people's issues with pull requests. That would be cool.
Perfect. Awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for making the time.
It was a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me.